January 26, 1945, Eastern France. The forest, near a village called Holtzwihr, is a frozen maze of splintered trees and drifting smoke. Picture a snowfield churned into grey slush by tank tracks and boots. Shell holes brim with icy water. Out on that blasted ground, a single American vehicle burns like a torch, an M10 tank destroyer, black smoke clawing at the sky. And on top of that burning hulk, a boy stands alone. He is 20 years old, though from a distance he could pass for 16. 5'5", maybe 120 pounds in soaked wool and steel helmet. His face is raw with cold and smoke, but his hands move with mechanical steadiness on the grips of a .50 caliber machine gun. The gun hammers, long bursts, short surgical taps. Tracers stitch the snow in front of an oncoming wave of German infantry. Men dive, fall, vanish into the fog of powder and earth blown up by his fire. Around him, the M10 is dying. Flames lick from the open turret, ammunition inside cooking off with sharp, savage pops. Every few seconds, a new blast showers him with sparks and shards of metal. Any rational person would jump clear and run. He stays. Below him, the line has buckled. His company, what's left of it, has already pulled back into the woods behind him, on his orders. He told them to fall back, to find cover, to live. He did not go with them. Pinned between German tanks and infantry, he has climbed the one thing on this field more dangerous than open ground. A burning vehicle loaded with explosives, sitting higher than any trench or stump. Every rifle and machine gun on the German side can see him. Many are firing at him right now. He leans into the .50 cal, firing at muzzle flashes, at shadowy shapes advancing through the trees, at tank commanders riding high in their hatches. He talks into a field telephone, calling artillery down almost on top of his own position. "Closer," he reportedly yells. "Bring it in closer." From the German perspective, the scene is almost unreal. A lone figure standing in fire and smoke, refusing to die, raking them with heavy rounds that punch through trees and flesh alike. From the American perspective, it's suicide bought by the minute, and those minutes may be the only thing keeping an entire company from being overrun. The young lieutenant on that M10 is named Audie Murphy. If you passed him on a street back in Texas, you might mistake him for a schoolboy walking home from class. The kind of kid you'd expect to see carrying books, not an army on his back. When he tried to enlist, recruiters laughed at his size. A military psychologist, looking at his childhood poverty, his slight frame, his 5th grade education, might have rated his odds of becoming a legendary combat leader at well under 1%. Yet in this moment, on this frozen field, the outcome of a German attack hinges on what this one underfed sharecropper's son chooses to do. This is the day that will earn Audie Murphy the Medal of Honor. But it's not a miracle that came out of nowhere. It's the climax of a long, improbable journey, from Dust Bowl hunger to battlefield command, from boy hunter to Hollywood star, from obscurity to a name etched into military history. Over the next hour, we're going to unwind how a small, shy kid from rural Texas became the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II, and what that transformation cost him. But first, we stay with him on that burning tank destroyer, staring down an army. To understand how that boy ended up atop a burning tank destroyer, we have to leave the snow and smoke of France and go back, way back, to red dirt and heat. June 20th, 1925, Kingston, Texas. Audie Leon Murphy is born into a world where money is almost imaginary and food is a daily question mark. He is one of 12 children crowded into a sharecropper family on the margins of the Great Depression. Picture a sagging farmhouse, fields that never yield quite enough, and a father, Emmett, who drifts in and out like bad weather. sometimes there, often gone, chasing work, or simply running from responsibility. His mother, Josie, is the anchor, small, devout, and stubbornly determined to keep her children alive. School, for Audie, is not a childhood birthright, it's a luxury. By the 5th grade, he's out. The logic is brutal and simple. Books don't put food on the table. Cotton and small game do. So instead of desks and chalkboards, his classroom becomes the furrowed rows of North Texas and the scrubby woods beyond them. He learns to pick cotton until his fingers crack and bleed. He learns the value of a penny, and then he learns the value of a bullet. Out hunting, every cartridge counts. The family cannot afford to waste ammunition or meat. If he ruins the body of a rabbit or squirrel with a sloppy shot, that's protein lost. So he trains himself, the hard way, to hit small heads at uncertain distances, often with a single try. This is not recreational marksmanship, it's survival. He studies animal tracks, wind, and the way sounds carry through brush. He creeps closer instead of taking long shots, conserving those precious rounds. Over time, he develops a frighteningly steady hand and an instinct for when to squeeze the trigger and when to hold fire. He also develops something less visible, a nervous system tuned to scarcity. Hunger, eviction threats, and the daily grind of labor carve a certain mentality into him. Hypervigilance, quick calculation, and a willingness to take risks if it means his younger siblings eat. Many later heroes in combat share this kind of background. Adversity pushes them to live closer to the edge, to treat danger as a familiar neighbor rather than an unthinkable stranger. But poverty isn't the only force shaping Murphy. Emotionally, his world orbits one person, his mother. Josie is the one who believes he is capable of more than the fields, who holds the chaotic family together with sheer will. When his father finally drifts away for good, she is the one who remains. Then, in 1941, when Audie is 16, that fragile center collapses. Josie Murphy dies after a long illness. For a boy already carrying the weight of his siblings, the loss is shattering. He will later have her reburied with military honors, a gesture that says more than any speech he ever gives. No matter how many medals pinned to his chest, in his mind, the person most deserving of honor is the small, exhausted woman who kept him alive. By the time the United States is dragged into World War II, Audie Murphy is not an ordinary teenager. He is a 5th grade dropout with a dead mother, an absent father, a rifleman's hands, and a brain wired for survival at any cost. And somewhere inside, a question begins to form. If there is a bigger fight out there, a world beyond the cotton rows and hunger, does he belong in it? When war finally crashes into Audie Murphy's world, it doesn't arrive as an abstract headline. It arrives as a challenge. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. The very next day, while the nation is still reeling, 16-year-old Audie walks into a recruiting office and tries to join the fight. He's too small, too young, and too light. The Navy turns him down. The Marines take one look at his slight frame and shake their heads. Even the Army initially wants nothing to do with this scrawny kid who looks more like a paperboy than a soldier. Imagine him standing there, thin, underfed, determined, hearing variations of the same sentence, "Come back when you grow up." But Audie Murphy doesn't really have a grow-up path mapped out. No clear job, no stable home life. His mother is gone, his father is gone. In his mind, the war is not just a national emergency, it's an opportunity to matter. Pop culture gives us an easy comparison. Steve Rogers before the super soldier serum. The little guy desperate to take on bullies, rejected over and over because the system weighs only height and muscle, not intent. In 1942, undeterred, Audie tries again. Birth records are adjusted, ages nudged forward, the way they often were in that era when teenagers lied to get into uniform instead of out of it. He is, in reality, around 17. On paper, he becomes just old enough. This time, the army says yes. When he finally raises his right hand, he weighs somewhere around 112 to 115 pounds. His listed height is 5'5". At induction, some recruiters reportedly laugh, betting he'll wash out in basic training. Drill sergeants see him and predict he won't last. He ships off to Fort Walters in Texas, then Fort Meade in Maryland, and discovers that the Army has a very specific idea of what a soldier should be. Bigger, stronger, louder. The physical demands hit him hard. Forced marches, obstacle courses, endless calisthenics. His small frame struggles to keep up. He passes out on a march at least once. There's talk of assigning him to something safer, like a cook or clerk. But then he picks up a rifle. On the range, that childhood forged in scarcity suddenly looks like genius. While other recruits fumble with sight picture and trigger squeeze, Murphy falls into an old rhythm. Targets pop up, he drops them. Not flashy, not showy, just precise. In the barracks he's shy, almost delicate, a kid who keeps to himself. On the firing line, he's something else. Calm, focused, utterly lethal on cardboard silhouettes. Psychologically, this matters. Murphy carries deep wells of shame about his poverty, his lack of education, his family's struggles. The Army, with its rigid hierarchy and clear metrics, gives him a scoreboard he can actually win on. Marksmanship badges, qualification scores. The respect of men who might never care about his past, but will care if he can shoot straight and stand his ground. The more people doubt him, the more determined he becomes to prove them wrong. Every snicker about his size is another log on a slow-burning fire. By the time his training cycle ends, the frail Texas cotton picker has become a competent infantryman. Still small, still young, but now wearing a uniform that grants him a new identity. The Army has no idea yet that it has just accepted one of the deadliest riflemen of the war into its ranks. And Murphy has no idea what that acceptance is going to demand of him. It doesn't take long for the theoretical skills of basic training to collide with reality. In early 1943, Audie Murphy ships out, crossing the Atlantic to join the 15th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division. He's still small, still quiet, another anonymous replacement in a sea of uniforms. In July 1943, he first tastes combat in Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. The landings are chaotic, rough surf, confusion on the beaches, men stumbling ashore under the weight of gear and fear. Sicily is rugged, mountainous country. Fighting here isn't about sweeping tank battles, it's about patrols, ambushes, and sudden bursts of violence in rocky gullies and olive groves. For Murphy, this is where the line between training and survival blurs. He experiences his first firefights, brief, shocking eruptions of sound where everything he's learned boils down to a few choices: move, shoot, or die. One of the early emotional turning points comes a bit later, in Italy. After Sicily, the 3rd Division goes ashore at Salerno, then grinds its way up the peninsula through mud, mountains, and fortified German lines. Somewhere in that brutal slog, Audie kills a German soldier at close range. Different versions of the story exist, but the core is consistent. The enemy is close enough to see clearly, close enough to recognize as a person rather than a distant silhouette. Murphy fires, the man falls, and then the noise, briefly, stops. Murphy sits and stares at the body. A comrade notices the look in his eyes, part shock, part grim acceptance. The job is done, the threat is gone. But there's a man on the ground who had a mother, maybe a wife, maybe a kid. That paradox will never really leave him. While he's processing this, The war around him is grinding up men by the thousands. The 3rd Infantry Division will become one of the most heavily engaged American divisions in Europe. Some of its rifle companies suffer over 100% turnover, meaning they're wiped out and rebuilt again and again. Statistically, being a frontline infantryman here is a bad bet. Depending on whose numbers you use, a man in a line company in prolonged heavy action faces better than even odds of being killed or wounded. Murphy doesn't just endure this environment, he begins to stand out in it. In Italy, he earns his first decorations, Bronze Star, then Silver Star, for actions that follow a pattern we'll see again and again. He volunteers for risky patrols when others hang back. He crawls forward under fire to spot enemy positions. He uses his marksmanship not as a sport, but as a tool, picking off machine gun crews, exploiting folds in the terrain, always trying to give his squad a tiny edge. He is not the loud, chest-beating type of hero. If anything, fellow soldiers describe him as reserved, almost boyish. Yet in contact, he becomes aggressive, quick to maneuver, quick to close with the enemy. Psychologically, what's shifting is his reference point. Fear doesn't vanish, it gets reweighted. He is scared, but he is more scared of failing the men beside him than of the bullets in front of him. Loyalty and pride begin to override self-preservation. By late 1943 and into 1944, Audie Murphy is no longer just a small kid trying to prove he belongs. He's an emerging small unit leader in one of the most battle-tested divisions in the US Army, blooded in Sicily and Italy and far from finished. By now, Audie Murphy has been baptized in fire. But to really understand what he's doing on those battlefields, we need to look at the tools in his hands and the odds those tools are fighting against. The basic American infantryman of World War II carries a weapon that is, in many ways, his lifeline, the M1 Garand rifle. It fires the .3006 cartridge from an 8-round on-block clip. Semi-automatic. No bolt to work between shots. In skilled hands, that means 40 to 50 aimed rounds a minute. Murphy learns to make that rifle sing, using it to hit moving targets, to suppress enemy positions, to win fire duels against soldiers armed with bolt-action German Kar 98K rifles that must be cycled after every shot. But the Garand isn't always his favorite. Often, he carries the M1 carbine instead, lighter, handier in close terrain, firing a smaller .30 caliber round from a 15-round magazine. It kicks less, weighs less, and lets him move fast. Perfect for a small man who fights by agility, not mass. Around him, the squad's real volume of fire comes from crew-served weapons. The Browning M1919 .30 caliber machine gun spits 400 to 600 rounds per minute, laying down dense curtains of bullets that pin German troops behind rocks and walls. Then there is the beast that will later define his legend, the Browning M250 caliber heavy machine gun. Mounted on vehicles or fixed positions, it hurls half-inch rounds at roughly 2,900 feet per second, capable of punching through light armor and tearing through cover that would shrug off smaller calibers. In the background of his war, metal monsters move. The M10 tank destroyer, open-topped, relatively thinly armored, built around a 3-inch gun, is designed to hunt enemy tanks by speed and maneuver, not to trade blows with heavy armor. Across the lines, German panzers and self-propelled guns bring thicker frontal armor and high-velocity 75mm guns. On paper, in many matchups, the German machines outclass the American ones that Murphy fights alongside. Artillery looms over all of this. US guns, 105s, 155s, give American commanders the ability to call down enormous destructive force. As an officer, Murphy learns to use radios and field telephones like weapons, walking shells onto enemy positions yard by yard. Technologically, the Americans hold key advantages. A reliable semi-automatic rifle in every rifleman's hands, robust logistics keeping ammo flowing, flexible artillery support, and, at the larger scale, air power. The Germans counter with superb optics, formidable tanks at certain stages of the war, and defensive positions carved into hills, towns, and forests with ruthless efficiency. Caught between these macro forces is the individual soldier. Murphy's genius is not that he has the best gadgets, but that he squeezes every ounce of potential out of whatever he has. He studies how sound travels, how muzzle flashes betray positions, how terrain breaks lines of sight. He learns to pair his personal weapon with the heavier guns around him, using the M1 or carbine to pick off key targets while directing machine gun or artillery fire to smash the rest. Again and again, on ridgelines, in vineyards, in shattered villages, he shows the same pattern. Calm under pressure, ruthless in exploiting every scrap of technological advantage, unafraid to get dangerously close if that's what the moment demands. All of this, the rifles, the machine guns, the tank destroyers and radios, is the world he will bring with him to that frozen field near Holtzwihr. But before he climbs a burning M10, the medals begin to stack up, and one quiet Texas kid becomes the man officers send when the mission seems impossible. By mid-1944, the quiet kid from Texas is no longer a question mark. He's a problem for the Germans. In the wake of the Normandy landings, as American forces push through the hedgerows and villages of France, Audie Murphy keeps doing the same improbable thing, surviving and leading from the front. By this point, he's already earned the Distinguished Service Cross, multiple Silver Stars, and Purple Hearts. Those aren't participation trophies. They mark repeated moments where he moves toward fire instead of away from it. In one action, his company is pinned down by German machine gun nests that have perfect fields of fire. Men hug the earth, unable to advance without being cut apart. Murphy crawls forward, inch by inch, using ditches and folds in the ground, until he's close enough to see the outlines of the gun positions. He then does what has become almost routine for him. He takes out one position himself, grenades, precise rifle fire, then uses the confusion to direct his men against the others. When it's over, the path forward is open, and the recommendation for another decoration is already on someone's lips. And yet, amid all this lethal efficiency, a different kind of story emerges, one that shows the other side of the man. In a lesser-known episode, Murphy's unit captures a German soldier who is barely more than a child. Accounts vary on the exact age, but he's visibly young. Too young, in Murphy's eyes, to be anyone's enemy. Some of the Americans are in no mood for mercy. They've lost friends to ambushes and booby traps. They've seen atrocities, or heard enough rumors to believe the worst. A captured German, especially a young one who might one day pick up a rifle again, is an easy target for rage. Murphy steps in. He makes it clear, the boy is a prisoner of war. He will not be harmed. Food, water, basic dignity, that's the standard. However much anger is boiling in his own chest, he refuses to let it spill onto a terrified teenager in an enemy uniform. It's a small incident in the grand violence of the campaign, but it reveals something essential. The most lethal soldier in the division is also the one insisting that a frightened kid be treated like a human being. This is the psychology of many American combat troops in microcosm. They are citizen soldiers, farmers, factory workers, clerks, motivated by duty, survival, revenge for Pearl Harbor, or simply loyalty to their buddies more than abstract hatred of the Hun. Murphy embodies this tension. Against armed, determined opponents, he is ferocious, almost frighteningly so. But he doesn't see every German as a monster. He reserves his deepest emotions, his fierce protectiveness, for his own men, and a grudging respect for any enemy who fights hard and fair. On the other side of no man's land, by late 1944, German units are fraying. Many soldiers are exhausted, disillusioned, or conscripted, including teenagers and older men dragged into Volkssturm formations. Nazi propaganda still screams about final victory, but in the foxholes, a lot of men quietly know the war is lost. This mix of fanatical ideology and creeping hopelessness will collide with Murphy's willpower in a frozen corner of Alsace called the Colmar Pocket. But before we get there, we need to zoom out to see the strategic map, the winter, and the impossible odds he's about to face. It's January 1945, and the war in Europe is supposedly entering its final act. But in eastern France, on a frozen stretch of land along the Rhine, nobody on the ground feels like the end is near. This is the Colmar Pocket, an ugly bulge of German-held territory in Alsace, west of the Rhine River. While Allied lines have surged forward elsewhere, here the front has snagged. The Germans still hold a foothold on the wrong side of the river, a potential springboard for counterattacks and a thorn in the side of Allied planners. For the High Command, clearing this pocket is about tidying the map, securing crossings, and denying Hitler a last chance to punch back in the south. For the infantry, it's about not freezing to death while trying not to get killed. The winter is brutal. Snow lies in uneven drifts across fields, churned by shells and tank tracks. Where vehicles pass, the white turns to grey slush and then to a glassy skin of ice. Mud lurks underneath everything. Temperatures sit below freezing. Wind knifes through wool coats, bites fingers inside gloves, stiffens wet boots until feet go numb. Frostbite is a constant threat. So is simple exhaustion. The trees are mostly bare, skeletal trunks and branches jutting from the snow, offering little shelter. Fog and smoke cling low to the ground, cutting visibility, turning every shape in the distance into a maybe. It's into this landscape that the 3rd Infantry Division moves, tasked with helping to crush the Colmar Pocket. Audie Murphy is now a first lieutenant with Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment. He's been wounded multiple times. He's earned more decorations than most men ever see. By any reasonable metric, he's done more than his share. He is still at the front. Alongside his company comes metal support, a platoon of M10 tank destroyers from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion. These open-topped vehicles, with their 3-inch guns and thin armour, will play a crucial role in what's coming, and become the stage for one of the war's most astonishing individual actions. Facing them are elements of a German infantry and armour force. Exact numbers vary by source, but after-action reports talk about at least 6 German tanks or self-propelled guns and roughly 250 infantry. On paper, Murphy's understrength company is outnumbered around 5-1 in infantry and heavily outgunned in armour. The Germans know they're fighting on borrowed time, but that can make them even more dangerous. A successful local counterattack here could slow the Allied advance, buy days or weeks for defences across the Rhine. A modern military analyst, staring at these numbers without knowing the names involved, might rate the chances of Company B holding in the open against such an attack at under 10%, unless reinforced by substantial artillery, air or armour support. And the odds that a single soldier could personally stall such a blow long enough for his unit to withdraw in good order, that drifts into statistical fantasy, maybe one chance in several thousand, if that. Yet this is the situation Audie Murphy walks into near the village of Holzwehr. He is exhausted, carrying layers of unprocessed trauma, but he is also the man his superiors trust when things get ugly. In this frozen corner of Alsace, the big arcs of strategy narrow down to something brutally simple. A thin American line, a powerful German attack, and the question of whether anyone will be standing when the smoke clears. Murphy is about to answer that question from the most dangerous place on the field. January 26, 1945. Near Holtzwihr, Alsace. The morning doesn't explode, it builds. At first there are only hints, the distant rumble of engines, the faint clank of metal on frozen ground. Then German artillery begins to feel for the American positions, shells walking in, testing the line. Dug in along the edge of a field bordered by woods. Murphy, now the acting company commander, scans the open ground ahead. He knows what's coming isn't just a probe. The reports are clear, tanks and infantry massing, a coordinated attack. When the German armor and troops finally appear, dark shapes emerging from the trees, Murphy reads the situation with a cold, practiced eye. There are too many. The armor is too strong. If his company stays forward in these shallow positions, they'll be flattened. He makes a decision. He orders most of his men to fall back into the woods behind them, to secondary positions with better cover. It isn't a retreat born of panic, it's a calculated move to avoid annihilation. Someone, though, has to stay up front to direct artillery and delay the enemy. Murphy chooses himself. As the German tanks push closer, one of the supporting M10 tank destroyers is hit. The shell tears into its thin armor. Flames blossom from the open turret. The crew bails out, some wounded, scrambling away from what has instantly become a blazing, ammunition-packed furnace. Everyone expects the M10 to blow. Ammunition inside is already cooking off, sharp cracks and flashes as shells and small arms rounds detonate in the heat. The vehicle is a beacon, drawing fire, a place any sane man would avoid. Murphy moves toward it. He is already wounded in the leg, but adrenaline and necessity override pain. He positions his remaining men, then takes a field telephone and begins calling in artillery on the advancing Germans, adjusting fire as rounds crash down. Then he climbs onto the burning M10. Up there, fully exposed, he swings the Browning M2 50 caliber machine gun toward the enemy. The weapon is bolted to the turret ring, meant for anti-aircraft and support fire, not for a single man to duel tanks and infantry with. He squeezes the butterfly triggers. The heavy gun roars to life, spitting streams of tracer into the snow-filled air. Murphy rakes German infantry crossing the open ground, targeting machine gun teams, officers, any shape that looks like it's leading the attack. Men fall, others dive for cover that doesn't really exist. All the while, he keeps the phone line pressed to his ear, shouting corrections to the artillery battery. "Closer," he demands. "Bring it in closer." Accounts differ on exactly how long he stays on that flaming turret, but his Medal of Honor citation will later say, "for an hour." However you pass the minutes, it is a sustained one-man defense under conditions that should have killed him instantly. He fires at infantry, then swings the gun toward tanks, hosing their vision slits and exposed crewmen, trying to blind and disrupt. German rounds slam into the M10's hull and the earth around it. Shrapnel bites his leg, but he refuses to leave. From the woods behind him, his own men watch, stunned. They see their lieutenant outlined against fire and smoke, apparently daring the entire German force to focus on him. The gamble works. German infantry wavers under the unexpected ferocity. The attack loses cohesion. In those stretched-out, frozen minutes, Murphy buys his company the one commodity they cannot manufacture: time. Time to regroup. Time to survive. When the smoke finally clears around Holtzwihr, the official language will sound almost clinical. Conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Behind those words is a brutal ledger. By the end of World War II, Audie Murphy's uniform carries more decorations for valor than any other American combat soldier of the conflict. His list includes the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars with V device for Valor, 3 Purple Hearts, plus foreign awards, French and Belgian honors like the Légion d'honneur and the Croix de Guerre with Palm. On paper, it reads like myth. In his body and mind, it feels like a bill that never stops coming due. Physically, Murphy is worn down. Multiple wounds, shrapnel, bullets, leave him with chronic pain, headaches, a leg that never quite lets him forget that day on the M10. He walks away from the war, but he doesn't walk away unmarked. Mentally, the damage runs deeper. They called it battle fatigue then. Today we'd call it post-traumatic stress disorder. Whatever the label, he lives with it every day. Nightmares drag him back to Europe, men calling for medics, the thump of artillery, the faces of those he couldn't save. He thrashes in his sleep, sometimes waking up disoriented, convinced he's under attack. He has trouble shutting down. Hyper-alert, he startles at sudden noises. Crowds make him uneasy. He scans rooms for exits, for threats. The war has rewired his nervous system so thoroughly that peacetime feels like an illusion. He sleeps with a loaded pistol under his pillow. In post-war America, this is not something men talk about. The public wants clean heroes, smiling veterans, parades, victory speeches. The greatest generation image leaves little room for panic attacks or insomnia. Murphy could have hidden behind that silence. Instead, he does something quietly radical for his era. He acknowledges the darkness. He speaks openly, at least in trusted circles, about his flashbacks, his anger, his inability to fully come home. Later, in interviews and in his memoir, To Hell and Back, he allows glimpses of the cost. There is another layer too, medication. At one point, struggling with insomnia and anxiety, he's prescribed Placidil, a powerful sleeping pill. Dependency creeps in. Recognizing the trap, he locks himself in a motel room and goes through withdrawal alone rather than let the drug own him. For a Medal of Honor recipient in the 1950s and 60s to admit any of this is almost unthinkable. Public figures simply don't talk about addiction or about psychological scars from war. Murphy does. In doing so, he becomes an accidental pioneer. He doesn't use the modern language of mental health advocacy, but his honesty chips away at the taboo. He embodies a contradiction that still resonates. The bravest man on the battlefield can be the same man who's afraid to close his eyes at night. Behind the rows of ribbons and the Hollywood spotlight, Audie Murphy is living proof that heroism and trauma aren't opposites. They're often two sides of the same coin. And that coin, for him, is very, very heavy. The war ends, but Audie Murphy's story doesn't fade into a footnote. It gets louder, broadcast onto magazine covers and movie screens. In 1945, Life magazine runs his photo on the cover, a slight, boyish Medal of Honor recipient in uniform. Hollywood notices, invitations follow. The underfed sharecropper's son from Texas now has agents and studio executives asking what he wants to do next. He heads to California. At first, it's not glamorous. Bit parts in low-budget westerns, small roles in war films. He's not a classically trained actor. He's a combat veteran learning to hit marks and say lines. But the camera likes him. There's a naturalness, a quiet intensity that directors start to lean on. Then comes the role that will define his film career, playing himself. In 1955, Universal releases To Hell and Back, adapted from Murphy's own memoir. He portrays Audie Murphy, the soldier, reliving in staged form the very battles that scarred him. It's a strange, almost surreal assignment, reenacting your own trauma for an audience, walking through stylized versions of places where friends actually died. The gamble pays off at the box office. To Hell and Back becomes Universal's highest-grossing film for nearly 20 years, holding that spot until the era of big-budget blockbusters. Long before the Marvel Cinematic Universe, America watches a real-life Captain America play himself. But behind the scenes, Murphy is uneasy. He doesn't want a glossy, sanitized war. He insists on including scenes that show the cost. Comrades killed, fear, exhaustion. He pushes back against attempts to turn his story into pure hero worship. If he's going to reenact the war, he wants some of the weight left in. In interviews, he remains shy, almost withdrawn, nothing like the swaggering screen cowboys he sometimes plays. When reporters call him a Superman, he shrugs it off. He insists he was scared most of the time, that the only real difference was his refusal to leave his men. Hollywood isn't his only creative outlet. Murphy also turns to music and writing. He co-writes country songs, some recorded by well-known artists of the day, adding another unexpected line to his resume. His memoir, To Hell and Back, does more than feed the film. It helps other veterans see their own experiences on the page. Long before PTSD is official jargon, his plain descriptions of fear, guilt, and nightmares give language to what many feel but can't articulate. So you have this odd double image. In theatre lobbies, kids point at posters of Audie Murphy, war hero, movie star, cowboy. On late-night radio and in quiet interviews, the same man talks, carefully, about the price he paid for every medal. From foxhole to film set, his life becomes a bridge between the myth of clean, glorious war and the messier truth he can never quite leave behind. By now, Audie Murphy's name is legend, but it's worth asking what that legend really means. Most decorated sounds simple. It isn't. Different branches, nations, and eras use different systems, and heroism doesn't always translate neatly into ribbons. But by US Army World War II standards, especially when you look at the number and level of valor awards actually earned in frontline combat, Murphy sits in a category almost by himself. He's not a famous general like Patton, shaping campaigns from a headquarters. He's not a fighter ace, scoring kills thousands of feet in the air. He's a frontline infantry officer whose body is physically present in the kill zone again and again. Think about the odds stacked against that. Start with his origins: poor, undereducated, physically undersized, rejected by multiple services. Add the mortality rates for line infantry in the Mediterranean and European theatres. Then factor in how rarely top-tier valor awards are given. If you did the math cold, no names, just probabilities, you might estimate that fewer than 1 in 100,000 enlisted men from his background would accumulate the combination of decorations he did. Fewer still would survive long enough to receive them. Layer on top the post-war twist. Of that tiny fraction, almost none go on to become pop culture icons, starring in films about their own exploits. Murphy is an outlier among outliers. Zooming back out, World War II is often framed as a triumph of industrial and technological might. American factories, code-breaking, radar, long-range bombers. And that's true at the macro level. But at the micro level, the foxhole, the hedgerow, the frozen ditch, outcomes still hinge on individual decisions. Murphy's story drives that home. The M1 Garand, the M10 tank destroyer, the .50 caliber Browning, they're tools. In his hands, they become force multipliers. His willingness to stand up on that burning tank destroyer, to call artillery closer, turns hardware into history. His legacy isn't just ballistic, it's psychological. By speaking, however cautiously, about his nightmares and rage, he cracks open the myth that the greatest generation came home untouched inside. Today, his life is used in military academies and psychology courses as a case study. Resilience under extreme stress, survivor's guilt, the long tail of trauma. Cadets at West Point and officers in training still trace diagrams of the Holtzwehr engagement, analyzing how he used terrain, firepower and timing to hold off a vastly superior force. At his peak, he was still that small man with a boyish face, easy at a glance to underestimate, yet his shadow stretches across both tactics and mental health conversations. On May 28, 1971, Murphy dies in a plane crash in Virginia. No enemy fire, no battlefield drama, just a peacetime accident that ends a life built around surviving the unsurvivable. He's buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His grave, marked with a simple white headstone, becomes one of the most visited in the entire cemetery, rivaled mainly by President Kennedy's eternal flame. A small stone, a giant footprint, and still, the most unforgettable image is that of a young man on fire in the snow, refusing to step down. So we return to that frozen field near Holtzwehr, a burning M10 tank destroyer. Snow churned to slush, German armor and infantry pushing hard. And on top of that flaming hull, a single undersized lieutenant, leg wounded, hands locked onto a .50 caliber machine gun. If you saw it in a movie, you might roll your eyes. One man holding off an oncoming force, calling artillery in on his own position, refusing to leave until his ammo and luck are nearly gone. It sounds like screenwriter fantasy. Yet it happened. Documented, witnessed, written down in dry military language, and seared into the memories of the men whose lives he bought minute by minute. The myth version of Audie Murphy is a fearless super soldier, a war god poured into a 5'5" frame. The human version is more complicated and more important. He was afraid, frequently. By his own account, he often felt terror like anyone else. The difference wasn't an absence of fear, it was what he chose to do with it. Time after time, he decided that loyalty to his men and a refusal to let them die alone mattered more than his own survival. That's not comic book invulnerability. That's a conscious, punishing way to live. Since World War II, the tools of war have changed. Drones circle at high altitude. Precision-guided munitions strike from miles away. Satellites watch entire continents in real time. Cyber attacks can disrupt cities without a shot fired. But for the people on the ground, the infantry patrol in a distant valley, the convoy on an exposed road, the medic sprinting under fire, the core experience hasn't shifted as much as we'd like to think. Fear, courage, guilt, grief, and the long echo of trauma still define their private wars. In that sense, Audie Murphy is not just a figure from a sepia-toned past. His story rhymes with today's headlines. Veterans coming home with invisible wounds. Quiet people who did outrageous things under fire, then spend years trying to reconcile the hero on paper with the hurting human in the mirror. If there's a takeaway from his life, it isn't just that a poor, undereducated, underestimated kid can become history's outlier. It's that heroism is often an adaptation to impossible circumstances, and it carries a bill. Murphy's medals measure what he did. His nightmares measure what it cost. He shows us that greatness can emerge from the unlikeliest places. From a cotton field in Texas, from a fifth-grade dropout, from a boy who simply refused to abandon his friends. And he reminds us that when we honor courage, we also owe compassion to the people who come home carrying more than we can see. In our next episode, we'll step back from one man's story and look at the broader science and psychology of fear in combat, how the brain and body react under fire, and what separates those who freeze from those who move. Until then, hold on to that image, a small figure on a burning tank destroyer, surrounded by snow and steel, choosing, again and again, not to run.